Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm Shirley Hernandez. I'm a work-based learning coordinator here for MDUSD, and today we have Chris Pankey, who is from Bay Ship and Yacht and Co., and he will be talking to you guys. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Hi. As she said, I'm Chris Pankey from Bay Ship and Yacht. We're located in Alameda, California, right through the tube, and then one turns right and it heads down toward the water, and there we are. We're a fairly large boat yard that repairs and also builds some boats. We work on all kinds of boats. To give you an idea of the boats that we work on, if you've seen the Bay ferries, if you've seen tugboats in the Bay, if you've been on red and white fleet boats, blue and gold fleet boats, Commodore cruise lines, hornblower yachts, we work on those boats. We repair them, we refurbish them, give them tune-ups, repaint them inside and out, work on their power, work on their structures if they want something changed. We do all that, and we from time to time build boats. A couple of years ago we built the US's first hydrogen-powered ferry. We built the structure, and then it was shipped up to Washington State to have the power added in. That was an aluminum boat. And we've also built a few barges, powered and non-powered. We're privately held. We have about 300 people working in our Alameda yard. We also have a smaller yard up in Richmond. It's called Svenson's Bay Marine, and that's on Cutting Way. We have about 50 employees there. They work on smaller boats, pleasure craft, sailboats, speedboats, fishing boats, usually somewhere between 20 feet and perhaps 85 feet to 90 feet long, if they're not too heavy. In Alameda, we have 2 dry docks that sink down and bring boats in. The biggest one is the big gray, it looks like a big gray structure right next to the Alameda Ferry Dock, and it holds boats up to, I think, 20,000 tons, and that are approximately 320 feet long. Smaller dry dock holds boats that are up to, I think, 12,000 tons. And then we also have a synchro lift elevator that lifts other smaller boats, research vessels, the tour boats in the bay, the tugboats, and that lifts boats that are up to 6,000 tons. And we also, some interesting boats that come into the yard are just multi-million-dollar luxury yachts that need work. And we get maybe one every 3 or 4 months in the yard. They're really interesting to see. We also get really interesting boats from the San Francisco Maritime Museum. Those are almost all wood. Some of them, like the Balclutha and the C.A. Thayer, are both, I think, over 125 years old. And they have plied the waters of the West Coast, and now they're in the Maritime Museum over at Aquatic Park in San Francisco. And we work on those boats regularly, refinishing them, refitting them, rebuilding a lot of the structure that just seems to fall apart because they're wooden boats. And ask questions anytime. I guess, is there a protocol for asking the questions? Are they going to enter the questions in chat? How's that?
They can put the questions in the chat, and then at the end, if you'd like, I'll ask the questions to you.
Okay. Some of the positions we hire for in the yard, one of the toughest positions to fill right now are the welding positions. We train our welders up. We want our welders to have some experience, some training in a trade school or a welding school, such as through the local community colleges. And that's a good start. It's a great start because the students have theory. Sometimes we've brought people in with none of the community college experience or trade school experience, and it's been kind of difficult with those people because they're really starting from zero. But when they go through the Bay Area Community College District welding programs like at Los Positos, Los Medanos, Chabot, and Laney College, they have a good background in welding, and they get it. They aren't welding at that level, at the level we need them to be, but we train them up to that level. We train all the welders in our yard up to ABS marine specifications. ABS are the ones that inspect our welds. That's who we tell the government we're using. They're approved. We use their specs, and everybody in our yard that is a welder trains up to the ABS certification or specifications level. And Most of our welding is done on mild steel. 90% of it is MIG welding using flux core wire. Another 9% is on aluminum, and the remaining 1% is on nickel, stainless steel, and copper welding. Most of the stainless steel, I think more stainless steel welding is done up in our Richmond yard, where they do a lot of custom work on people's pleasure craft. But still, that's really what our welding is. We also look for electricians, marine electricians. We look for marine pipe fitters. We look for painters. All of our painters are hired as entry-level painters and then trained up from the ground up. And we have approximately, I think, 65 to 70 painters in our yard. I think we have around 50 welders. I think we have less than 15 electricians and less than 15 pipe fitters. But it's a very busy yard. We consistently have 12 to 14 boats in our yard. We are a government subcontractor. We're an essential business. We currently have, I believe, 4 government boats in our yard on top of the other ones. They are 3 landing craft, one really large one that hauls huge vehicles, and some other 2 other smaller supply landing craft that are almost half the size of the larger one. We have a small Coast Guard cutter in our yard. We also have a really interesting boat in our big dry dock right now. It's a really large vessel, but it's a research vessel. And I cannot remember who backs it, who provides it. I'm not sure if it's Woods Hole or which university, but it's the Sally Ride, named after I think the first female astronaut in the US. And it's a great vessel. It's just wonderful. And these research vessels are always wonderful to look at and to take tours on. It's kind of fun to go up on the boats, and they invite us up. It's a kick. But those are what we work on. Those are the skills we look for. You see on my hat, it says Bay Propeller. This is one of Bay Ships or Bay Maritime Group's subsidiaries. We have a propeller shop that refinishes propellers in our yard. And these guys are like the blacksmiths of the sea. And the magic they work with these boats is amazing. They take broken and bent propellers, barnacle-ridden propellers, grind them down, weld the fixes, shine them up, buff them, and when they go back on, you see them get placed on the boats, lifted by these cranes, because these propellers are heavy. They get lifted by the cranes onto these boats and then fitted onto the propeller shafts, and they're just sparkling when they get on. They kind of look like earrings on the boats because they're so shiny and kind of cool. But these guys do amazing work. We also have Svensson's Marine and Industrial Supply. It's a boat, hardware, and equipment supply store and warehouse located within the yard in Alameda. Bay Propeller is also in the yard in that same building. And then another subsidiary of ours is Bay Machine and Fabrication. And we do custom fabrication for a lot of companies. We do it for our client boats. If something breaks on their boat and they can't order it, our people will build it. We also contract work out to other companies, to petrochem companies, to oil and gas companies, to really any other boat works. When something needs to be fixed, built, or just, we have the capabilities. We have, I think, 3 water jets now. We have plasma cutting machine. We have a mill, Bridgeport mill, vertical mill. And we also have, I think most of the lathing is done manually, and that's done to really straighten out or true up the propeller shafts. But we have all kinds of capabilities. We have 60,000 square feet of fabrication space within Bay Machine and Fabrication. That's also in our boatyard in Alameda. And it's kind of cool to walk through there and see what they're working on. Sometimes they're art projects where people want, last year, this guy had all of these on our water jet machine. It's cut by water. I'll explain real quickly what a water jet machine is. It feeds little bits of garnet into a high pressure water stream that's, I think, running at over 10,000 PSI, and that cuts the aluminum, and it cuts through it real quickly. But we had one person order all these. He had like 4 to 6 silhouettes of of birds that he was cutting out of. Each one was about 4 inches long, and we cut those out of these sheets of aluminum, and I think we did a couple hundred, 300 to 400 of these birds for him. And what he did was, he's a retired just executive with a company that has this thing. He's very artistic, and he makes these huge mobiles that fit in the atriums of people's estates or in buildings, and he builds them for his friends. And this one was just all these birds in different forms of flight made out of aluminum, and just the thing would shimmer when it hung in the atrium of the lobby. It was just outstanding what this guy built. But we cut out all of these birds for him on our water jet machine, just to give you an idea of what that does. It cuts through that kind of thin 1/4 inch aluminum really quickly. What else? Our boat yard up in Richmond, I said, Svensson's Bay Marine is for smaller boats. Talk to you about the subsidiaries, talk to you about what we do, the people we hire. We also hire people in the offices. We hire cashiers, we hire customer service people, we hire warehouse people for the supply center and store. We hire accounting personnel, and we've also brought in marine engineering interns to work out of our yard, to work in our main offices, because we have Bay Marine Engineering is another subsidiary of ours. Are there any questions?
There is. I was wondering if you can go a little bit over the training program that you guys have.
For welding?
Or yeah.
It's all hands-on training. Usually the people that come in the welding department they start out, we have a checklist of level 1, level 2, level 3, and I think level 4, abilities. And they have to meet this checklist. They have to kind of master the items and the things that are on the first level 1 are pretty easy. It's grinding, it's kind of chipping away at the metal and just gouging it and things, just some basic and cleanup. And then it goes up from there. It goes to, I think, some minor welding, just some laying down some beads. And eventually what it gets up to is overhead welding and putting in really good beads that passes the ABS testing certification tests. Overhead round corners, confined space welding, fire protected welding. Fire protection is another one that's down, and fire watch is another skill, if you will, that's listed down on the level 1 or level 2 level, position. It's also important because when you're welding on something, on say a bulkhead inside a boat, you don't know what's on the other side of that bulkhead. You have to know. You have to inspect it and make sure there's no wood or anything flammable. You and the fire watch person that's accompanying the welder will go in there and look. And then the fire watch person will stand back and just make sure that everything's safe for the welder. Because once they're under the hood, and they have that bright flame in front of them, they can't see what else is going on around them. They can't see the smoke gathering in the area. If the ventilation stops for whatever reason, the fire watch person's responsible for stopping the welder, calling attention to these issues, and then clearing out of the area if they have to, if it's an unsafe environment. It's needless to say, it can be risky in the yard. And every year, in 5 successive years, we've had improved safety records, and no serious injuries last year. That was a wonderful thing. But we're really safety conscious. We have a safety manager, and we have a number of safety officers in the yard that are always on the lookout. And sometimes people, if they think it's not safe, they don't go to if they don't feel comfortable going to their manager about it, they have the phone number for the safety officer, and they'll just call them and say, or text them and say, can you check this out? And the safety officer will come over and look at it and just say, yeah, guys, I got to shut you down for a while until we do this. And just, we're not doing this. And they just, oh yeah. And so they do what's right. They get the proper lighting in there. They get the proper power. They get the ventilation working. Because sometimes when a welder's under the hood, they just want to get the job done. They're just buried down there. And the fire watch person has to be responsible for calling attention to those things. just if it's missed, other people may bring it up. But we're very safety conscious there. Before anyone starts in our yard, they go through safety training. That's part of the orientation process. But they train up to those standards, levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they usually are a flying wingman with another senior welder who's not only taking them and showing them the ropes, but is also, giving them some experience welding in the shop. We have a shop where they go in and say, yeah, try welding this and doing, using this torch, using this diameter wire, flex core wire on the steel, and see how we lay the bead down. Don't get it too hot, not too cool, and they start on flats and then they go to sides and then, verticals, and then they go to overheads. And it's all challenging. It is. And I just had a person interview last week and interviewed for a welding position. He just flat out told the welding manager he cannot weld overheads. He cannot do it. For whatever reason, he says, I can't do this. And the manager asked me, says, well, would you be willing to learn? And the guy says, I've tried it before, I can't. And that was the end of the interview, but at least he was honest. And the manager was straight with him. He would have trained him and would have brought him on, to train him if the guy was willing, but the guy wasn't willing. It's not for everybody. The confined spaces aren't for everybody. Number one, they have to fit in those confined spaces. And number two, they can't be claustrophobic when they're in there. We've had people bail because they're great welders, but they get claustrophobic down in these really confined spaces. Now I asked my sister was actually a welder in the Navy. And I asked her if it was that tough in these confined spaces. And she said, yes, it is. She says, if you have a tendency to get claustrophobic, you're going to just freak out in some of these tiny spaces. So it's something to be concerned about, something that, we try and screen for, but we can't always do that. But the senior welders take these people under their wing and train them up. And then they report. There's a checklist that they sign off for the person, and that person keeps it, and they just move up the ladder. And the one thing I will say is the biggest issue in the yard, I think, with some of the newer trainees is that they can't leave their cell phones alone. They can't put them in their pocket, and they want to check their texts or voicemails on too regular of a basis. There are breaks and there are meal breaks, but there comes a time when the cell phone has to be turned off and put in their pocket. It's just the way it is. It's a working yard. And also when someone's paying attention to their cell phone and looking down at it out in an active yard, it's not necessarily the safest thing to do, because there are cranes that are operating, there are tractors going by, trucks going by carrying things, forklifts. One has to keep their head on a swivel in this yard, in all of our yards. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Sure.
We have a couple questions in the chat. What kind of boats do your team members usually work on?
What kind of boats?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As I said a little earlier, and that's okay because I understand people are coming on, but if you've ever been out on the bay and you've seen the bay ferries going by, the blue and white bay ferries that come into all the docks, we work on those. We work on the red and white fleet boats, blue and gold fleet tour boats, the Alcatraz boats. There's a boat that belongs to, I think, Hornblower Yachts, and it's called the Spirit of San Francisco. It's a pretty big boat, but it's near and dear to my heart. I'll tell you this. It's because 10 years ago, I jumped off that boat just offshore in San Francisco outside the Golden Gate to swim across the Golden Gate Bridge to Marin. And so whenever I see that boat, I go, I know that boat. It's the only time I've ever swum the Golden Gate, but that was kind of fun. And it's nice to see that boat still in operations. But these boats are, we work on tugboats too. Some of those are kind of interesting. It's amazing how many anodes they have to draw the current, the electrical current away from the boat's, drive shaft, propeller, so those things don't corrode. So they have these anodes, we call them zincs or anodes, screwed into the hulls on the bottom of the boats and on the sides. And with the tugboats, they're generating so much power on their huge motors that they really generate this current, this electrical current in the water, and it's the anodes that, how do I say it? They draw the current, and so they're the things that corrode, and they kind of look like, when they take them off, they look like if you've dropped a fizzy or an Alka-Seltzer partway in the water for about half of its life and then pulled it out. They're all corroded like that. It's really interesting, but that's from the current that's generated around the boat hull when the motors really spool up. And so combined, I think, with the chemicals in the water. Not sure about that, but interesting. But tugboats, ferries, antique boats from the San Francisco Maritime Museum. Balclutha is one. C.A. Thayer is another. It was a lumber hauler up and down the coast, built up in Eureka. That's a 3-masted boat. The Balclutha is a 4-masted boat. There's also the Alma, which is a shallow draft boat they used in kind of the shallows of the Bay Area, because it's got a real shallow draft and a retractable keel, but it's about, I want to say about 90 to 120 feet long, and it's I think 2 or 3 masts on it. These are all sit in the San Francisco Maritime Museum waters over at Aquatic Park in San Francisco. All kinds of boats, research vessels, not uncommon. We've had a steady flow of them coming in, and more boats are coming in now that things are opening up in the Bay Area now that COVID is, more people are getting shots, and there are people are looking forward to herd immunity. Some of these companies are looking for their business expanding this summer, and that's why we're getting more tour boats in our yard right now, because a lot of these boats have just sat at the docks for 6 months to a year, and when that happens, sitting still doesn't do any good for a boat. It just, things start growing on the hull, and so the hulls have to be high pressure hosed, and then typically repainted, recoated with primers and anti-fouling paint, and then they take out any dents, they patch anything that needs to be fixed. I don't know if any of you remember the San Francisco ferry that ran into the dock. There was a transmission problem, and I think 2.5 years ago, it ran into the dock in San Francisco. It was kind of big on the news. You can see it on YouTube. And this ferry, the guy couldn't, I guess, get it out of drive, and it just drove forward into the dock, and you saw everybody screaming and running. It wasn't going to tear the dock down. The docks are too strong, and it wasn't going fast enough. But it punched 2 holes in the boat, in the aluminum prow in the front of the boat, and I saw it on the news. I didn't really think much about it, and then that was on a Thursday, I think. I came into work on Monday morning. There's the boat like 50 yards from my office, staring at me with these 2 big holes in it, and so it took about 2 to 3 weeks to fix those holes, to patch those aluminum holes in that boat, and then went out for sea trials and put back in service. Another month later, it was back in the yard. It actually, in that 1 month when it was in service, 1 or 2 months when it was in service, it backed up over a submerged piling, and it was stuck in the ground, but still underwater. It backed over there, its prop hit it, and it blew one of the props completely off the boat, off the propeller shaft. The thing broke and fell to the bottom of the bay, and that boat had to come back, and we had to tear apart all of the drive mechanisms to see what was damaged. The whole drive shaft and the structure that holds it banged up and put a dent in the hull. That had to be patched. It spent a lot more time in our yard. It spent like 3 or 4 months in our yard, as opposed to the time when it just put 2 holes in the front of the boat. That was patched in 3 weeks. Removing all the drive gear, testing it, and then replacing it took, I think, 3 to 4 months. But that was one of the San Francisco ferries.
Wow.
So kind of interesting and great to see these boats. You see us patch them, and then I go out, I'm on the ferries myself, and I say, oh, that's the boat that they fixed. Kind of fun. It's
cool to see
cool.
your work. This one said, you mentioned at the beginning that you worked in aircraft field first. Why did you get interested in the field of boats and vessels?
Sure, I can tell you. Well, the airline field, I've always liked airplanes, for one, and I've always liked boats. I learned to sail at an early age. I've probably had more of a passion for aircraft, and I got the chance to work for an airlines down in California. I moved down from Washington to work as a flight attendant for 5 years. And With some people, it's the travel. With me, it was just being around the aircraft. I loved the aircraft. I got to see so many different aircraft and talk to pilots that I eventually got my pilot's license. And I love flying. I love, flight. I don't know what it is. It's in our family. My father did. My nephew does it. He's a flight instructor. But I also grew up in college. I learned to sail up in one of the lakes up in Washington State. Then I moved down to California to work with the airlines. My aunt and uncle lived nearby, and they had a sailboat, and so I used to sail it and work on it to fix it up. And then I started fixing other boats, and then I kept sailing for years, and just usually crewing on other people's boats, except for two small day sailors that I had. Then I got into tech staffing. My interest remained high. I was flying. I got my pilot's license, and I kept sailing. And then this job came up, and I thought, this company would be cool to work for. And I called somebody that worked there. The benefits manager there was someone that I had placed when I was with the tech staffing company. And she said, you'd be great for the job. I sent my resume to her, and they hired me within 6 days for the recruiting position there, which was kind of fun. And I'll be honest, for anybody that's considering working in a boatyard, you won't work in a better work site. You won't. It's just wonderful there. You're right on the water. If you like boats, you're surrounded by boats, all different kinds. Some are real ratty looking, and some are just beautiful. We're working on the Oakland estuary, or in our Richmond yard. They're right on, up on the North Bay, right in the Richmond Marina up there. But we look out right on the estuary, and we see all of these boats sail by in the early morning hours. We get there when it's dark, and I get there about 6:30 in the morning when I'm in town, and it's just everything's sparkling in the boatyard, and the East Bay Hills are sparkling with the lights. And you can look north and look up to San Francisco and see the Bay Bridge with the traffic going over it. And it's kind of a magical feel. It really is. And I think sometimes, when we get wound up in things, in work and projects, all of us in the offices and those working on the boats, it kind of is lost on us at times. But when I talk to the people out there on some beautiful days, I talk to various workers and I'll say, beautiful day today. And they'll just shake their heads and go, this is wonderful. They love it. A lot of these people who work there just love the environment. Sure, there's some cold weather and some rain outdoors once in a while, although they're just getting to and from the boats. We don't paint them and work on the outside of the boats when it's raining, but they'll be down inside the boats doing work or in the shops doing work. But it's a beautiful environment right on the estuary. And there's also one other thing. You've all seen the big freighters in the bay that come in with all these big containers, and we're on the estuary, and every one of these containers that comes into the port of Oakland comes down the estuary right to our last dock. And just off our southernmost dock, the tugboats turn those big freighters around right there. It's called the turning basin. And so you see these boats that come by looking like walls of containers that just are so much higher than us and higher than the boats in our yard. And then all of a sudden you go down and you watch them just turn. These tugboats turn them in about 5 minutes. They're facing the other way. Then they tow them back up to berth at the Port of Oakland's cranes. And that's where they unload them and load them back up. And then they're heading out. So they just turn them around so they can be heading out when they're done loading and unloading. So anyway, I hope that answered the question, but it's a wonderful environment for someone that likes that kind of stuff.
How competitive is the field of boats?
Working on boats is competitive. There are a lot of smaller marinas that work on boats, smaller boatyards that work on boats. I think our Richmond Marina has more competition than we do. There was a really big boatyard in South San Francisco run by BAE Systems that closed down about 2 or 3 years ago. And that was a really big boatyard. Now, I think our primary competitor is up in Vallejo at Mare Island. they have a nice boatyard up there. It's got a lot of history up there. That was at one time it was a submarine base, and they do government work. I know that I've seen Coast Guard boats in there too, and I'm not sure if they've done Navy ships, but we compete for that work. But it's competitive, but it's not as competitive as it once was with the other boatyard. And there aren't too many boatyards with our capabilities in the bay. I think the one up in Mare Island has similar capabilities. And so that's who we're competing with. How competitive is it? Not as competitive as other positions, as other companies are. We're consistently busy, which really matters. So.
A student asked, what's the salary of a welder?
Salary of a welder, they're actually hourly rates. They're paid hourly, and they start out, the entry-level welders start out at between, depending if they've come out of community college and they also have some welding experience, they may start anywhere from 20 to 22 an hour starting. If they don't have any work experience and they just came out of the community college, it may be 18 to 19 an hour they start at. And if they can pass the ABS test out of the gate, they will start out at least 25 an hour. But I've only seen 2 people who can pass that ABS certification test right out of the gate. And those 2 guys came out of the Navy where they were doing marine welding. So that's where those are really the starting points. In our first year, there are 3 reviews and raise opportunities, and usually the guys who are doing well and they're going to stick around, and it's quite a few of them. There's a review at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months, and each review is a raise opportunity if the person's doing well. And usually, if they're doing well, they'll pass that ABS certification test within the first 6 months, and certainly by the first 12 months, if they get it. And then. Where they, I don't know where they max out at. I think it's, I've heard, I think high 30s, perhaps low 40s an hour. And that's not including the overtime work. Some of these guys work a lot of overtime, and overtime is paid at time in accordance with California state labor law. It's paid at time and a half over 8 hours or 40 hours in a week, or paid double time over 12 hours in a day, or over 8 hours, I think, on your 7th consecutive day of work. So some of these people make good money doing this. So that's it.
So they're asking if you can go over or in depth about the ABS certification.
I'm sorry, I can't go in depth on it. I can't, simply because I don't know the specs, the specific specs.
Okay.
I have to look them up. I have them somewhere, the forms. All I know is it has to do with laying down. They're tested on these sheets, and I forget what they call them, but they're small squares of metal, and they want to see what the person's beads are like, how they grind them out or gouge them out, and lay the beads down. And then they also they test them on laying down those good beads on walls and on overheads. And in terms of the spec sheet on the ABS test, I can't cite anything on that. It's like, I think 3 or 4 pages, and it's beyond me. You welders who are skilled or who will be skilled, my knowledge of welding is superficial. Go ahead.
How likely is it for females to work in this field?
Highly likely. We just don't get a lot of female applicants. The last one I had one who came in. She'd worked in shipyards down in the South and on the East Coast, and she moved out to California. And there's a difference in some of these bigger shipyards. I think even down in San Diego or back east, there's one person that does the fitting, one person does the tacking, and another person does the actual welding. They travel in crews around the boats. These boatyards are huge. And San Diego is huge. I mean, their boatyards are too. But here in our yard, we ask that people do everything, fitting, tacking, and welding. This woman was actually similar to a couple of guys that recently could not pass because all they'd done was fitting and they hadn't done the actual welding. And when the manager said, we can bring you in, but it's not going to be at the level you want to be. And she was experienced. She had like 10 to 12 years of experience, just like this one guy that came in, he had over 20 years experience and he couldn't do the welding. He couldn't do the overhead stuff, the vertical stuff. He was just there for fitting and he couldn't do the rest. And he admitted it. He just shook his head and said, I can't do it. I don't have it in me. She couldn't do it. And she insisted she should earn more money, but there was a training curve that she would have to join the other trainees in learning it from the ground, not really necessarily from the ground up. She had a head start, but she wasn't going to start at the level she wanted to, unfortunately. I don't get a lot of women applicants for the welding jobs. So
I think this will be our last question. What advice can you give these students who are trying to get into this field? What recommendations would you give them?
is this for the welding field?
Or just for anyone who wants to go into the boat field or welding?
I would say get experience. In very few positions in our yard will they train them from the ground up. In painting, they will. They'll train them from the ground up. I have a guy just sent him to for his pre-employment physical. He's graduating from high school, and since it's virtual, he's taken on a job as a painter, entry-level painter in our yard. But that's from the ground up training. And that's what they want to do with the painting department. So they learn it our way. But with welding, I would recommend if you want to be a welder in our yard, I would recommend that you go through one of the local community college programs. There are trade schools too. They're very good. They just don't give you the breadth and depth of knowledge because there are some core requirements you have to take that are unrelated to welding, but also contribute to your overall educational experience. It all matters. And these welders that come out of these community college programs are outstanding. They are. They do a really good job for us. And they're just sharp and they're dedicated, and that's what I would recommend. I would recommend going through one of those programs, getting accepted into one of those programs. And some of them are really improving, what they offer in terms of the equipment that's being donated to them by some organizations or equipment they're having fund, they're buying through new funds. But also bear in mind that we work with the community colleges, and sometimes people will come to us after a year in the community college and say, I've got this experience. Can you guys hire me? And we said, we hesitate to, simply because we have a relationship with the community colleges. The community colleges funding, industrial arts funding, is based on the number of people that graduate from those programs. And if we kept pulling those people out, we're kind of, shooting ourselves in the foot. And we're not doing any favors for the community college because they're not going to get the funding for that student. And if it's a hardship case, we'll talk to the school and discuss it with them. Otherwise, it's our preference that the people go through and get the full education from the community college program or from a trade school and then come to us. And then that's a good basis from which to start. With electrical, same thing. If you have any electrical experience, a lot of people come to us with electrical experience and that we bring on are actually coming out of the military. They have marine electrician work even in the Army, because the Army has landing craft, and Navy, Coast Guard, all of these vessels have electrical, they have to have electricians on the boat to deal with the issues. And those are the people we typically hire. Sometimes we hire people that are residential or business electricians that are sharp and can convert their knowledge and learn the marine aspects. But these are typically where we bring the people from. Does that help?
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Chris, on behalf of MDUSD staff and students. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come speak to our students.
You're very welcome.
I'm sure we learned a lot, so thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Anytime. Thanks for your